Greetings, friends. Today we are going to talk about an odd little historical artifact titled A Spaniard in the Works by a gentleman named John Lennon. You may have heard of him. He was a member of a band called the Beatles, which had a bit of a following back in the 60s. It's possible you've come across his name before, but in all seriousness, this is by the John Lennon. It was one of two books published in his lifetime. It was published June 24th, 1965. The book was a massive publishing success. It sold 100,000 copies in its first 3 months of publication, which even now would be considered a successful book, but back then, 1965, it was a very successful book. The book is, usually when I do these reviews or discussions, I have to be wary of spoilers, but there's no such concern this time, because you can't really spoil this book. It's basically just a bunch of nonsense, and by nonsense I mean deliberate nonsense, quasi-artistic nonsense, which we'll get into why I say quasi in a moment here. But so the title itself, so in the UK, for you my American watchers here, what we call a wrench, they call a spanner. And so this is a play upon the term a spanner in the works. And you can see he's holding the spanner right here. And so obviously that's a term, you throw a monkey wrench into the gears, you gum everything up, and that's basically what the book is. It's a big celebration of wordplay. And when I say nonsense, I mean it's literally nonsense. It doesn't really make any rational sense, though there are some consistent themes that come through in it. These have been observed by people in the past, by critics in the past. And while the book was commercially successful, it was met with mixed reviews by critics. I apologize, I had a thought there and I forget what I was going to say. Regardless, so before I go on, I just want to say that John Lennon obviously was one of the great musical geniuses in history, without a doubt. I do not doubt his genius, and far be it from me to criticize the man's genius. However, I personally have a hard time calling this a work of genius, and I think it's only any legitimacy that it had solely on the fact that Lennon was undoubtedly a musical genius. But that genius doesn't necessarily carry all over into every area, and I enjoy owning this book because it's an interesting historical artifact. I'm a big fan of 60s history, and John Lennon was a critical person in that. And also, I consider the book as the book is emblematic of its time, in the sense that, the entire hippie 60s counterculture was challenging the very philosophical foundations of Western society, including logic and rationality. And this book is, in many ways, it is just an assault on logic and rationality, because it's wordplay and nonsense for the sake of wordplay and nonsense. And and also it's filled with Lennon's illustrations as well, which are cartoonish and amateurish, but they're fun in a childlike way. Here's another one. I did I had the book ready for one brief poem that I think kind of gives a taste of what the book as a whole is like. It reads thusly. It's called The National Health Cow. I strolled into a farmyard when no one was about. Treading past the troubles, I raised my head to shout. Come out, the cow with glasses. I called and rolled my eye. It ambled up toward me. I milked it with a sigh. You're just in time, the cow said. Its eyes were all aglaze. I'm feeling like an elephant. I haven't been milked for days. Why is this? I asked it, tugging at its throttles. I don't know why. Perhaps it's 'cause my milk comes out in bottles. That's handy for the government, I thought, and in a tick, the cow fell dead all of a sudden. I'd smashed it with a brick. Now, that little poem is, in my opinion, it is illustrative of, or representative of the writing in general for a couple reasons. Number one, it's like childlike poetry. I mean, it's almost like a nursery rhyme type thing. But number two, one of the consistent themes that I had referenced vaguely earlier, one of the consistent themes throughout the book is there's physical deformity, but there's also kind of like outsiders and groups. But there's also these little like political things all through it. As you can notice right here, the poem is titled "The National Health Cow," and it ends with the proclamation of "That's handy for the government," which he says just before he smashes the cow dead with a brick. And it's odd, and it's amusing, but I have reading a book like this with an artist of Lennon's caliber, it's obvious to want to say like, oh, that is such a brilliant examination of whatever. I think it's just silly. It's and maybe Lennon was just having fun, but those kind of really just kind of asinine quasi-political statements that were so popular in the 60s, I've come to find them ridiculous, and especially now after time has gone by and we've seen the destructive force of that kind of irrationality. Irrationality that masks itself as profundity. Great art is often ambiguous, and ambiguous in the sense, or ambiguous in a way that hits us with the profound. It uses contrast in the unexpected to kind of topple our perceptions and leave us with an epiphany, right? Like that's what great art does. It topples our perceptions, our thoughts, our feelings, and it hits us with a story or with an image or with a sound, whatever it may be, or a combination of those things in such a way that it causes us to perceive reality in a better way or a different way, and we come out of it feeling like we've gained something from it. I think that's what great art does. But the mistake in that is then looking at everything that is irrational and contradictory and silly and projecting genius onto it. And I think that's inaccurate, and I don't think of this as a work of genius. If it wasn't for the fact that it was John Lennon writing it, I doubt it ever would have been published in those times, and it certainly wouldn't have been a bestseller because it's just a bunch of nonsense. And which is, I mean, I am a creative person, I am a writer, and so like I can respect if Lennon just said, hey man, I'm on top of the world, I can publish anything that I want. I mean, that's awesome. Like good for you, John. I would do the same exact thing probably. But so none of this is a criticism of him as a person, but the book itself, the writing's just garbage, and that's just a fact. I bought the book for a reason, because I like it as a historical artifact, but I think in an honest assessment, I don't see any artistic value in it beyond the fact that it's tied to John Lennon himself. And all of these, like I said, it's filled, one of the themes running through it is it drops these little, what are supposed to be, I guess, political statements. And you got to remember that John Lennon was a man who glorified Chairman Mao, who was a butcher of millions of people. So Lennon and those of his period like him, many of them were artistic geniuses, but they were otherwise just kind of morons. And I think the book is, if I'm being honest, I think the book is an expression of how little Lennon and people like him had to say about anything truly philosophical or meaningfully political. I mean, it's just nonsense. I can, write some crap about a house burning down with ferrets inside it, and then throw in a line about, just like the workers' unions. And, if you are somebody who is on if you're somebody who's plugged into that certain culture as Lennon was, then you'd have all these people saying, wow, that's such a profound statement about workers' unions. Is it? I mean, is that stupid poem about a cow actually a profound statement about anything in any real meaningful sense? I mean, it's not. It just shows a really silly, shallow political perspective and just philosophical perspective. And yes, I'm saying that John Lennon, in this case at least, and I would say in other cases, had very shallow philosophical understandings and thoughts. And I think it's I believe it's a damaging thing that these great artists, and let me reiterate, John Lennon was a great artist. But I link him kind of like, okay, Bob Dylan is my favorite music. Well, Bob Dylan and Tom Waits, but I love Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan was really overtly political for a time in the 60s. One of the things that I admire about Dylan was there came a point where he realized that he was being turned into sort of a political messiah. Dylan had the self-awareness and the humility to realize that he didn't know a damn thing about these topics. It's easy to sit there and say, war is terrible. No shit, war is terrible. It's not that simple, man. Like, nothing is that simple. Especially not when you're talking about, international politics. And to try to reduce it to these goofy little statements and then have other people read these goofy statements and act as though it's profound, it's just silly. And, Dylan caught on to that too, and he just bowed out of it. There's that series of interviews. I believe it was around like 67, but I could be wrong. But, where he would just say to the reporters, look, I'm just a musician. I don't know why you're looking to me for all these answers. I don't have these answers. That's something I admire tremendously about Dylan. And Lennon never got that. Lennon mistook his own artistic genius for overall genius. And I think it's a dangerous thing when you have people who can persuade the masses in life, political beliefs that are rooted in a bunch of nonsense poems about cows and stuff. I mean, I do think that's dangerous, and it's something that persists today. Like it or not, a huge portion of people, they take those things as their philosophical cues. Their road to truth are these quasi-profound, little oversimplified concepts that to me are corrosive and extremely damaging. And when I started this, I wasn't exactly sure what I would want to say, but so these are kind of really my honest feelings coming off the cuff, and that is about how I think of this book and about Lennon's overall political activism. Now, that's not to say all of it. I mean, like the thing that he did where he stayed in bed with Yoko Ono, hey man, that's cool, dude. I can totally understand why people oppose the Vietnam War. Even with the Vietnam War, I think even the Vietnam War is oversimplified to people's perspectives. But still, I can totally get that, man. I mean, the guy was famous. He was extremely wealthy. And yet he decided to take it upon himself to try to stand against something that he considered evil. And I can respect that tremendously. So I'm not trying to make this like a blanket criticism of everything about Lennon, but I do think using art to make political statements is just inherently flawed. I don't think art is properly the grounds for meaningful philosophical or political expression or discussion. That's just the way I see it. I'm sure John Lennon would disagree, and he wouldn't be particularly concerned. I mean, the guy had an amazing life and reached a tragic end, cut down by a weirdo. That's about all the thoughts I have to share on this. As a historical artifact, I love owning this book. I forget how much I paid for it, but even in this beat up condition, it still went for some. I think I paid, if I recall, I think I paid like $50 for it, and it was on sale. So, I mean, it's a reasonably rare collectible in the sense that people will still pay, multiple dollars for a beat up old copy. So I'm glad that I own it. Also glad because, like I said, I love the history of the '60s. Obviously, the Beatles are one of the greatest bands to ever live, and of the Beatles, Lennon was my favorite Beatle. I love the stuff he did with the White Album. He's absolutely a musical genius. But as far as a work of art in itself, I don't think this would have ever been published if it wasn't the fact that it was by John Lennon. And that's just how I feel about it. And that's all I got to say. It's an intriguing book, and I hope you enjoyed sharing it with me, my friends. I hope you all have terrific days.